Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. Appreciate Andrew asking CO2Meter to be part of the virtual spring seminars. We are excited to be able to bring something that's a little different than what folks have been seeing this week from the virtual seminars. And we're going to mainly discuss safety in breweries today. And we're going to focus on gas safety. As everybody knows, CO2 is an important component in the brewing process, but it also can be a significant hazard too. Our team here at CO2Meter focuses on the safety aspect for brewers and breweries and wineries, and more than 100 different other applications. So we're uniquely positioned to be able to offer some insights here, and really do appreciate the opportunity to share some of this stuff with y'all. There is a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Just a little bit about what we plan to talk about today. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview of our company, just to give you some idea why we feel we're credible in the marketplace and our customers feel we are too. Talk a little about some values. We'll talk about the actual science of the gas. What is carbon dioxide? Why is it dangerous? There's some fun facts thrown in, but we're also going to then get into the negative health effects of the gas. And then moving on, we're also going to talk about some of the standards and codes that have been created to give breweries and employees some guidelines about safety. We'll talk about specific locations in breweries that we're interested in need to monitor for carbon dioxide. Then, as I said, at the end, we'll take up some Q&A questions at the end. So just a little bit about CO2Meter. We have been in business a little bit more than 15 years now. We do focus on carbon dioxide. Obviously, the name of the business tells you that. But we also do a significant amount of work in oxygen detection and other inert gases like argon, helium, nitrogen, and others. You can see at the bottom, we've got sort of 8 main buckets of business that we work in. Breweries and wineries is one of those, but we do a significant amount of work in the agricultural world now with the growth here domestically in the U.S. with the cannabis markets, a significant amount of business with the restaurant and food production, indoor air quality, fire suppression. Scientific and medical has been huge. And then we do a significant amount of business in just the raw sensors themselves. So we have sort of 5 main buckets that are our core values. First of all, we want to be subject matter experts. We're not just here to make devices and turn them over and leave people on an island. We're really here to dive into the topics, or what we call applications. We want to be experts so that when someone from the brewing world contacts us, we can speak directly to their needs. We don't want to guess. We don't want to have to look it up. We want to be able to say, you know, we've done this before. We've done this with some significant customers, and be able to share that information with you. Second of all, we always want our technology to be top-notch. We are always innovating. We are always improving current devices and looking to design and manufacture the next greatest, latest devices. But more importantly, we don't let anything out of here that isn't working 100% correctly. So we check everything here at our U.S. facilities. Everything gets checked before it goes out the door. We have human-centered support, so if you pick up the phone, you are going to get someone that answers the phone. It is not a recording. We feel like customers deserve to have that contact, that human interaction with folks, and have their questions answered real time. As I said before about the technology, we are constantly innovating. We want to design new devices. For example, we're just getting into the welding world. We've practiced and created some devices and tested them and field tested them over the last couple of years, but you'll see us come out in the welding world this year. So we're always continuously innovating. Lastly is trusted performance. If we didn't make great devices and customers didn't use our devices, we wouldn't be considered a trusted partner. But as I said, being in the business more than 15 years now, and you'll see this a little bit later when we talk about some of our brewery customers, but we are considered the go-to source, not just for the monitors and the devices, but also for education and information. A little bit about me. I am the Executive Vice President of Business Development and Operations here at the business. I have been working here a little bit more than 8 years now. I do not have a background in gas detection or monitoring. It's pretty varied, as you can see there. I think the highlight for me, I worked on the buying team for beer, wine, and liquor for Costco for 10 years. So that was pretty fun for me. And I'm also involved here in the community. So I sit on a couple of boards of directors and some other associations, and happy to provide our insight and information for people to get educated. So let's dive into the actual science of the gas. So, people know that carbon dioxide is out there, but it's, you can't see it, you can't feel it. But how do we really know it's there? It is two oxygen atoms covalently bonded to a carbon atom. And as a reminder, we're talking about carbon dioxide, not carbon monoxide. Monoxide comes out of the tailpipe of your car. CO2 is what puts bubbles in our beer. So the word covalently, or that bond, the covalent bond, means these can be split apart. So to give you a little bit of an idea here, the molecule itself is produced in the human body, and it is also produced naturally. So in natural environment, the decay of plant matter or animal life, even humans, that produces some CO2. Off-gassing from fissures or volcanoes, you'd see a higher CO2 content at the top of the volcano than you would at the bottom. It's produced unnaturally, so it is produced through some industrial processes. The one that most brewers know is that their CO2 comes from the production of ethanol. It's a byproduct of ethanol production. It's refined down to get it down to the purity, what we call beer gas or beverage grade CO2 purity. And it comes in three forms: liquid, gaseous, solid. Solid is dry ice. It's the one that most people know, but it's the one they know least about. But it's it's a pretty simple thing to understand. A few clicks on Google or Wikipedia gets you some of this information. But it's naturally occurring in the Earth's atmosphere at around, today it's around 435 ppm. If we looked at it 25 or 30 years ago, we would be down under 400. So it is increasing, and that is a detectable number. This graph's designed to give you an idea of what folks are looking at when they're looking at CO2 numbers. So low, as I was just saying, low in our atmosphere, somewhere between 4 and 450. I took a measurement outside here in Ormond Beach, Florida this morning. We were at 435 at about 7:30 this morning. The global CO2 numbers taken twice a day at the top of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. I think this morning they were at 432 or something like that. So that's typically what your outdoor atmospheric CO2 number is. Air quality, both OSHA, U.S. Green Building Council, NIOSH, they've all developed standards that give us indoor air quality numbers: schools, offices, church, home. You want to maintain somewhere between 500 and 1,000 parts per million. That's going to give you good indoor air quality. Anything over 1,000 is considered either marginal or poor air quality. Schools and universities, they want to typically keep it under 2,000, keeps people learning, awake. I always say my junior in high school isn't falling asleep in math, seventh period math class because he had pizza at lunch. He's falling asleep because the CO2 in the classrooms built up over time. And his cognitive abilities as well as his level of energy go down as the CO2 number comes up. Hospitals and labs, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000, lots of people in there, but they're also using a lot of gas in those spaces as well. They're using almost 100,000, usually somewhere between 50 and 100,000 ppm of CO2 to regulate the pH balance in their incubators. So there's a lot of different uses for the gas. Lastly, beverage grade or agriculture, we're trying to typically measure between 5,000 and 40,000 ppm, and this is for safety. We're going to touch on some of the codes and requirements later, but we wanted to, notate this directly up front. 42 states, all 50 states have a fire code. 42 of the states have updated to a newer version of the fire codes, NFPA, IFC, or the boiler inspection code that will require safety monitoring for any place that the gas is stored. So we'll touch on those regulations a little bit later, but this is going to sort of become the focus of the back end of the conversation today. So we gave you a couple little high points on the science of the gas. Now we wanted to really start to dive into the safety aspects and why it's important to not only understand the gas, but develop some safety protocols, some standard operating procedures, and then make sure you educate and train on them. So obviously, as everybody in the brewing industry thinks they know, it is an odorless, colorless, and tasteless gas. I know a lot of people out there will tell you that they can, especially in the brewing industry, they can smell CO2. You can't smell CO2. It has no odor whatsoever. You're probably smelling some of the particulate matter or compounds from your brewing process carried off with the gas. Some folks that are exposed to it on a very frequent basis, so I would say daily, can determine from a sort of taste perspective, you get a little bit of a tingle in the back of your throat. That's CO2 creating carbonic acid in the back of your throat. But most people, 99.99% of people in the world cannot smell it, taste it, or see it. So that's why it is such a hazard. There are increasingly negative health effects when the exposure of the gas starts to increase. So obviously, as in lower ppms, in 1,000, 2,000 ppm, you might feel a little dizzy, maybe get a headache. Some people get cotton mouth, get a little dry eye. As those ppm levels start to go up, you get into the tens of thousands of ppm. Some people will get a shortness of breath. People with COPD or asthma, for example, will start to feel the negative health effects of CO2 quicker than the average human being. Then we're going to start to get to the really dangerous effects. When you get above 40,000 ppm, which is OSHA's independent IDLH number, the independent dangerously life and health number, up above 40,000 or 4% CO2, we are talking about unconsciousness, asphyxiation, and potential fatality. What we want to do today is give you some information in order to make sure that we never get to those bottom three variables. So we've outlined a couple of incidents here on the screen. We do this not to be controversial or to shock people. The incidents in breweries do happen on a frequent basis. Probably most of the folks on this call have either had something CO2 related happen to them directly or know somebody that it's happened to in the brewery. These incidents, like I said, they do occur quite frequently. And the purpose of Andrew asking us to participate today was to give you some additional information, help you create some standards and education for your staff so you never get to be one of these incidents. So we've touched a little bit on the standards and codes. We want to get a little bit deeper into this because it is going to start to affect everybody more and more. Everybody that works in a brewery, everybody that works in an industrial facility or a business knows about the folks from OSHA. They create standards and practices based on research they've done that are supposed to keep folks safe. They usually do these in conjunction with the folks at NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. And NIOSH helps do the research and create these standards, but they're not in the field. The folks at OSHA are in the field, so that's why you see a person with an OSHA clipboard or a hat or gloves or badge, and that's why a lot of people get worried when the OSHA person walks in. They usually are worried because they probably know they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. So, based off the OSHA and NIOSH standards for carbon dioxide, these three organizations created standards of their own that they could put into practice throughout the United States. I'm going to start on the right-hand side, the National Board Inspection Code. This is what we call the boiler inspectors. If you're a brewery, you've got a boiler. These are the folks that come out and typically are doing inspections on an every 3 to 5 year basis for your boiler. But they were the first back in 2012 to create a standard around CO2 monitoring. Most people ask, like, why do the boiler inspectors care about CO2? Well, your bulk tank or cylinders are considered pressure vessels, and these are boiler and pressure vessel inspectors. So they do have purview. If you're in a state that uses the NBIC, and there's about 40 that do, most of them are northern states, but even here in Florida, we've got a boiler inspector. They do have the ability and permission and purview to look at your CO2, or if you're storing nitrogen, they'll look at your nitrogen tanks as well. The association in the middle is the National Fire Protection Association. About half the states use the NFPA or some form of the NFPA as the backbone for their fire codes. I happen to sit on the NFPA 55 committee. That's where carbon dioxide is. Unfortunately, most people ask me, why is NFPA 55 cover CO2? NFPA 55 covers cryogenic fluids, because CO2 is not a cryogenic fluid. It didn't really have another place to go, but they squeezed it in 55. The NFPA 55 document for CO2 is probably the most generic or vanilla set of codes of these three. They do not prescribe alarm settings. They don't prescribe positioning of sensors. It really is meant to give an overarching or an umbrella view of life safety standards. That's why most states incorporate parts of the NFPA into their life safety systems. On the left is the International Fire Code that is developed by the International Code Council. These are the same folks that create the building code and the electrical code and the boiler and the plumbing codes. So they are creating literally dozens of codes, but the International Fire Code is one. And starting in 2015, the IFC started to ask for CO2 monitoring. That was the first time CO2 monitoring showed up in the International Fire Code. The specifics of that code detail that any facility that stores more than 100 pounds of carbon dioxide for their purposes will need to either continuously monitor or continuously ventilate. Nobody picks ventilation because to ventilate appropriately by the code would be very, very costly. So most people pick the monitoring because it's a lower cost opportunity. It also gets into those little nicks and crannies in the facility where the gas can get trapped. Two other things about the code that are unique in the IFC: it does give a first alarm threshold of 5,000 ppm instantaneous. Although this runs contrary to the standards that OSHA and NIOSH have created, the 5,000 ppm number is in the International Fire Code, and is the first alarm set point for the IFC. The other piece that the IFC prescribes is the location of the monitors, and it does prescribe that a CO2 monitor should be located at 12 inches off the floor surface. Because the gas is heavier than air, they want to make sure we're detecting CO2 long before it becomes an issue or a hazard. So I was on a call with a large brewer in North Carolina on Monday, and we covered off on these areas. And one of them was a little bit of a surprise to them. So in your facilities, we're typically worried about fermentation areas, bright tanks. If your CO2 storage vessels, tanks, and cylinders are inside, we definitely want to take a look at those. Bottling, kegging, canning, people know about those. But really the number one risk is if you have a tap room that has a draft beer cooler, that is the number one hazard location. And it's not because of the CO2 mainly, it's because of improper use or training by staff of how to handle things like keg couplers and changing out kegs and not bashing kegs into lines and fittings and things like that. So, yeah, they were very surprised when I asked them if they had a monitor for their draft beer coolers. So, we're going to be able to provide them some additional safety monitoring for those areas starting here next month. So we're excited about that opportunity. The other area, if you have a brew pub or a restaurant or you have any sort of serving area, the other places that we're concerned about is the use of CO2 in beverage dispensing. So syrup guns, soda guns, dispensers, etc. Bib pumps on racks and in keg coolers crack and leak quite frequently. So there are a lot of other locations if you have this type of additions to your facility, a lot of other thoughts to have in mind here when you develop safety planning. As I said before, the keg cooler is definitely the number one location that we want to be mindful of. It is a confined space. That keg cooler, draft beer cooler, is designed to be a confined space. It's designed to trap cold air inside and keep that beer cold at the temperature you prescribe. Temperature is also important to make sure that the beer is being dispensed in the CO2 volumes and pressure that you want for it to be optimal taste when it gets to the dispenser or the tavern head. But that keg cooler is designed to trap everything inside, but it will also trap the CO2. There have been instances where people have entered draft beer coolers and were lucky to escape. You will start to feel the effects of a CO2 leak in a closed cooler within a few seconds. There have been known instances where people have been on the floor, passed out and dead within less than a minute. So the incident people point to most frequently these days, there was a fatality at the Atlanta Braves Stadium. Draft technician working in the cooler, door shut behind him, and he couldn't open the door because of a latch issue, and there was a CO2 leak, and he was passed out and dead pretty quickly, unfortunately. And that case is still in litigation, as far as I understand. So be mindful of those keg coolers if you got one. If you've got questions about coolers, we can either answer them at the end of our session today, or you can reach out to me directly. I love this. Ashley Rodriguez just started with us about 90 days ago as a graphic designer, and she put this together. So I thought it was a neat way without being too terribly invasive of describing the issue. As you know, CO2 is heavier than air, so that's why it collects at the floor first. Its molecular weight, what we call the mole weight of the gas, is about 44 and change. And you can see about a dozen different gases here, along with their molecular weights on the right-hand side. Everybody knows helium is light. It's what you put in balloons. You probably know that nitrogen is pretty light, ammonia, oxygen, those types of things. But you can see all those components that are heavier than air that tend to sort of start to collect at the floor or towards the floor first. Think of something like carbon dioxide, like water. It's going to find its lowest point. That also means that it creates a hazard that's unique. So if you take a facility or an example like a draft beer cooler, if there's a leak in that cooler, it's going to fill like a glass of water. It's going to fill from the bottom up. And it will start to push all these other gases out from the top of the cooler itself. It will find those leak points to start pushing these other gases out. If you were to have, say, a nitrogen leak, if you had a cylinder or a tank of nitrogen leak, it's going to start to collect at the ceiling first and then start to push everything down and out. So it would be like filling the glass of water from the top down. These are important notes, because if you have any of these other gases, like nitrogen on hand, you want to understand that we are not going to be able to use a CO2 monitor to measure for nitrogen, it's going to need to be measured in a different fashion with a different sensor. So keep that in mind if you've got stored nitrogen or argon on hand. The other reason we show this chart is because we want to ensure that we talk about the theory of gas stratification. Over time, gases are going to separate. They're going to collect in their areas by themselves. That's also interesting or important for CO2 because as it's going to collect at the floor first, the worse you feel, the worse off you're going to get. So if you were to walk into a hazardous area, start to feel the effects of CO2 because it collects at the floor first, when you start to steady yourself, or if you were to pass out, you're going to pass out into the hazard. The situation only gets worse from that point. That's why it's important to be mindful of CO2 situations where your hazard points are and install the correct gas detection to account. We talked about their molecular weight. As I said, it's about 44 and change on the molecular weight scale. I'm going to show 6 different gases. We saw them a little bit on the previous slide, but it'll give you an idea. That is methane, CH4, ammonia, NH3. You guys will get a lot of that from some of your cleaning solutions. Nitrogen, carbon monoxide, oxygen, and finally CO2. I went lightest to heaviest in this presentation, just so you had a representation of sort of what these gases look like and do. So let's talk about some of the preventative measures that you can start taking, some of the areas you can identify to make sure that you're going to be CO2 safe. First tip is to make sure you are installing monitors in the correct locations. Typically, a monitor is going to cover about 12 to 1,500 square feet per device. And we're talking about square footage, not cubic. Think of each own space or confined space as its own space. So if you have a walk-in draft cooler, if your cellar area is separated by walls or even half walls, sub-basements or basements are always a concern. They're always their own confined spaces. So think of each own confined space needing its own set or device. Especially in a keg cooler, it's difficult. You can't always get something 12 inches off the floor, but typically we're going to want the sensors mounted 12 to 18 inches off the floor. If you have a keg cooler, just make sure you talk with your fire inspector or local inspector. They typically are pretty reasonable and let you at least put it up above the first set of kegs so nothing gets rammed into it. Especially with the National Board or Boiler Inspection Code, they do require a monitor or a display at eye level outside the space. It's important to be able to know that you're potentially walking into a hazardous space before you do. That's why that pre-warning is so important. We do want to protect the devices from splash or spray. They are considered scientific equipment put into a brewery, so simply be mindful, cover them if you're going to do a wash down. And as I said earlier, lower areas like sub-basements and basements are always very susceptible to these types of issues. Tip number 2, continual awareness. Again, just put up a couple snippets of different incidents that have occurred. And just to highlight for you, that these incidents actually do happen and that there are intelligent people out there trying to create codes that are helpful and keep people safe, not just, be disturbing for you or cause an issue. Obviously, the key for this area is, understanding what those codes are, being aware, actually educating, creating an educational platform and training sessions for your staff, and then continuing to train repeatedly on this. I was speaking with Andrew before we started today, and I always note for folks, it's great to create a standard operating procedure and train on it. But you really shouldn't stop training on it until your employees say, okay, this is the 900th time we covered this. We got this. Don't stop the first time they say it, stop the 900th time. You want reactions for safety issues to be instantaneous. You don't want to have them think about it. We want them to react based off of the training they've had, not have to go to a book and read about what they're supposed to do when the incident occurs. Tip number 3 goes back to our friends at OSHA. You always want to know what OSHA would consider a confined space in your facility. OSHA is maniacal about making sure that you have the proper lockout, tagout procedures for confined spaces and confined space entry. Most people know about the first 3 on the left-hand side, but as we mentioned earlier, the walk-in keg coolers, while not on OSHA's radar because OSHA gives a free pass to walk-in coolers and freezers, the walk-in cooler is technically a confined space. Tip number 4 goes back to those standard operating procedures. Be mindful and consistent about your housekeeping. We always say the 3 most important portions of any safety system or safety protocol are training. Much like buying a house is location, or your business. It's training in these cases. You constantly want to review your SOPs. Have somebody from outside your facility review your SOPs. If you have another brewer in the area, offer to go to each other's facilities and look around and review each other's SOPs. Have you missed something that somebody else is going to pick up on? That camaraderie still exists in the brewing world, so take advantage of it and help each other out. Always contact the local fire inspector if you have questions. They like people asking questions. They're not ogres, and it's always great to build up a rapport with the fire inspectors. Certainly makes your inspection time go a lot smoother. Number 5, signage is so critically important, especially with the turnover we have in the brewing industry these days. Signage is important, instantaneous notification or identification of what the issue is and what somebody should do. But that doesn't take the place of making sure that staff is educated on precautions. One of our partners in the brewing world, the folks at Lagunitas, said to me years ago, there's no point in us paying a couple $100 for a monitor or a set of monitors if we don't train people on what to do if they go off. So why do we buy the monitor? Why is it installed where it is? How does it operate? What do you do if it goes off? Pretty simple way to create your standard operating procedures. For anybody that needs help, we've got some generic standard operating procedures we're happy to share with folks and can help you touch them up if there's particulars or particular issues or ideas that you want to cover for your particular facility. Just a couple folks that allow us to use some of their information and their references based on use of our devices. We are always happy to get this feedback from folks. One of the reasons we're able to improve on our devices and design good new ones is we do get this customer feedback. So if you do have any of our stuff and you feel like you want to share, feel free to reach out to me. As I said, we're happy to get that feedback. This gives you a representation of some of the folks that we work with and that rely on our devices to keep their facilities and their employees safe. If you know folks at these places, reach out to them. I know they would be happy to share their experiences, share the information about the devices they use from us. The great thing for us with all of these folks is they've been, as I said before, they've been willing to provide us feedback, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. The folks at Lagunitas have shared a lot with us from their facilities. And it helped us build some new devices. So the mothership now has some new monitors from us. So We are happy to work with anybody just to make sure that you understand what the hazards are and how we can help you stay safe. That guy looks like he's got my haircut. So let's talk about preventing some of these safety issues. Pretty much this is safety 101, educate, invest in the right devices, make sure you're constantly putting on safety sessions and seminars for folks. If signage falls or becomes loose, make sure you're fixing that. And then we do provide, as I said, we provide resources here. And it's not just about our devices. If you've got somebody else's devices or looking at somebody else, our focus is to obviously, we have a business to run and we want to sell our devices, but as long as someone is educated and makes good decisions, it doesn't matter to us which device you buy, just as long as you're staying safe. As a side note, the picture you see there on the right, that is the SAN 10 personal 5% CO2 safety monitor. Brewers and the guys in the cannabis facilities, CO2 drivers and techs, they love this thing. It's worn on a belt clip or as you see, he's got it there in his pocket, but pretty reasonable readings there in the brewery that guy was working in. But it's designed to keep him or her safe in the environments they work on while they move throughout their day. The wall-mounted or fixed devices are obviously the most popular with our brewery and winery folks. These are designed to be mounted in fermentation areas, near bright tanks, in walk-in draft coolers. They are designed to be a permanent fixture so that nobody can fiddle with them or fudge them. Typical monitor is about a 30-minute install. If you don't want to do it, I've got folks in the geography wherever you are. I guarantee you I can help you find somebody come and do this for you. Portable devices, we talked about that SAN 10 previously, but the picture you see here is our CO2 leak detector. We designed this so the detector measures 20 times a second. I have draft installers and brewers who tell me they can find the leak on which side of the fitting it's on. So it takes a very fast, accurate measurement. But yeah, portable devices are great. They are in no way, shape, or form to be used as substitutes for fixed devices. Fixed devices are critical and important because they can do something for you. So if they detect a high level of CO2, they can set off an alarm, they can trigger an exhaust system, they can be run to the fire panel, things like that, shut off valves. We're seeing more and more requests by fire inspectors to have exhaust fans or systems or shut off valves triggered from fixed devices, especially at breweries. And then we know them as accessories, but we talked about strobes and things like that, shut off valves. We've got all the things, I don't want to say all, we've got a lot of things that brewers have asked us to combine with our safety systems in order to give them a more comprehensive package. So something like this strobe tower is pretty cool. So you can get a visual and audible indication from across the facility about the status of your monitor. This is a brand new device for us, just released in 2020. The CM7000 is multiple sensors. We can now go up to 60 sensors and horn strobes off of one essentially iPad or touchscreen display. This gives the brewery or the facilities manager an instantaneous understanding of what's happening in the brewery, what's happening at each sensor location. We love this. One of the things our brewers love about this is it allows them to name each sensor. So you could say fermentation 1, fermentation 2, bright, keg line, canning line, walk-in cooler. Each one of those can be individually identified so that you instantaneously know which sensor is in alarm status. You'll see there from the display as well that the ppm reading on the sensor is transmitted back through a Cat5 cable instantaneously to the display so that anybody will know what the reading on that sensor is. It also changes color depending on alarm status. We give you 3 relays to trigger, like we said, exhaust or fans or shut-off valves from this. But this device is really designed to give you a more comprehensive overview of your facility. So Like I said, brand new to us last year. We've got a couple of thousand of these in the marketplace. I'm happy to tell you we just installed this system at the new Heineken facility in Miami. This is our standard CO2 monitor, fixed wall-mounted CO2 monitor. It's been in the market probably 6 years now. Everything the CM7000 does is, except this is a single point of detection, single point of enunciation. So if you've got a smaller facility, you only need 2 or 3 monitors, definitely the way to go. Talked about some of those accessories like the strobes and strobe towers. All of our devices ship with the required signage. If you need extra, let us know. If we've got some extra that we can give you, we will. We will provide you the PDF so you can go get it printed. Some people print them on acrylic. Some people attach them using, so to FRP, they're going to glue them on. Some people put magnets on them so they can stick them to cooler doors. But yeah, signage is important. We've got extra if you need it. Talk about some of those personal devices or portable devices. You'll see the information here. We just went through a redesign on the SAN 10, so we're going to get a much longer battery life out of it to give people more than probably 2 work cycles on a charge. Lastly, did want to come back to this. We've got obviously a set of resources. If anybody is part of the Master Brewers Association, they utilize our resources in their toolbox for their CO2 safety protocols as well. But we've got obviously a series of products, but we also have the background information, all the documentation you need, YouTube videos if you want to see how they operate. And then, as I mentioned, we've got those standard operating procedures. We can help you customize them for your facility. So I'm going to shut the presentation off now and go back to the Q&A session. We've left ourselves about 15 minutes. So we'll see if anybody had questions today. Well, Andrew, I appreciate that. Andrew made a note there that he thought this was great stuff. We'll give it a couple minutes to see if people got questions. I know, especially around the codes and things, people have questions. So, yeah, I'm not worried. Like I said before, if nobody's got questions in the chat today, certainly you're going to be able to watch this on YouTube as soon as Andrew has it posted. But feel free to reach out directly. We're happy to answer any questions at any time. It's our job to give you that information and provide you the best information possible for people to make intelligent decisions. So we're happy to do it anytime. Looks like nobody's got other questions, so I'm gonna jump off. But like I said, contact us anytime that we can be helped. CO2Meter.com is the website. You can find us on social media. We work pretty hard at those things. Give us a shout. If you use our devices, give us a shout out too. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.